kicking things off, what is County to County? It's an all-volunteer organization committed to helping strengthen democratic campaigns, parties throughout the state. So since 2017, we've partnered with over 40 candidates, and that includes over more than 20 counties. And so we do phone banks, canvases, text banks, postcards, training, and as well as messaging. So we really latch on and help out folks in the ways that they need the help most. So that can take many different forms. And if you want to learn a little bit more about what we're up to and what we have coming up, feel free to go to our website, countytocountync.org. Why do we phone bank? Besides getting out the vote, county to county, we make several different reasons for calls: constituent services, recruiting volunteers, inviting folks to events, and educating voters is a big one as well, like the calls we're making tonight. So as voter ID comes up, voters have a lot of questions and they might not know the best way to get that information. So making these calls is going to be really critical in helping inform voters and make voter ID less intimidating and really help them make sure they're able to vote. And so kind of a little bit of fun data behind phone banking. The kind of literature suggests phone banking really does help, and it can be shown to increase turnout by 2.5%. So in 2022, one of our partner candidates, Brian Farkas, he lost by just 1.2% of the vote. So as we're making calls, sometimes it can feel like you're calling into a void, and it feels like I'm not reaching a voter. I'm not getting someone on the phone who's directly confirming they're voting for Brian Farkas or whoever we're calling for. But some things to keep in mind is, especially as we're making calls this far out from the election cycle, these calls are critical in helping clean up data lists for campaigns. So if you get a bunch of calls of someone saying, I've moved, I no longer live here, or wrong number, that data then gets back into the system. So as we're calling in the lead up to the elections, we're getting clean numbers, we're getting clean lists, and we're hopefully making more direct voter contact. So with that, it's all about the mindset for making calls. When I first kind of started phone banking, I was not into it. I was kind of intimidated to be like talking to someone on the phone, feeling like I don't know what I'm saying. But I always like to think about it, think if the person is excited and waiting to hear for you, especially because often a lot of our calls are not persuasion calls as much as we're calling into Democrats who maybe don't frequently vote as much, or in the calls tonight, calling strong supporters and letting them know about this information. So they're excited to hear from you, hear from a real person who wants to have a conversation and give them that information. So that's something to keep in mind. And smiling while you dial, it kind of sounds cheesy and corny, but it really works. And if you're in a good mindset when you're making these calls, the person on the other end of the line can tell, and it really helps get a positive experience. And something else is there's always a script, a guideline, something to help you flow with the conversation, but feel free to kind of switch it up and speak in a way that makes sense for you and how you normally talk with voters, using your own words, but sticking with the intent and the goals of the script. But we'll get more into that as we kind of show y'all a sample script. And the worst thing that can happen is a rude call. At the end of the day, you're on the phone with someone else. And so it's not kind of a direct confrontation that some people are afraid of. Another way, kind of a fun way as you're phone banking, is kind of thinking of all the different possibilities and options. So something that sometimes we pass around is called phone bank bingo. So thinking of all the different possible options every time you call the voter, what are you going to get? Sometimes you call someone who knows someone you know, or you know someone on the list and you end up calling them. Someone texts you back. That happens a lot. Wrong number no longer in service. All the different kind of myriad of options of what different calls you could get throughout your phone banking journey. And so now kind of getting into what does phone banking look like with county to county. As y'all probably all found the information about this, we sign up via our Mobilize page, and then you get an email midday, the day of the phone banker. Sometimes it comes the day prior, where you get that information about the Zoom link for the night. When you sign up for a phone bank, you also receive the link for the phone bank itself, as well as information about the candidate. And there's a little cheat sheet in there that I'm going to show y'all a little bit of a preview of some kind of phone banking basics, as well as it'll give you a brief overview of the campaign, the district we're calling into, to help inform your calls as well. And so with that Zoom link, like we're all doing tonight at the phone bank, there'll be an intro Zoom that y'all can join. And that's where we kind of get oriented to the calls we're making tonight, give a brief overview, and oftentimes the candidate or the members of the campaign will be able to join and answer questions directly and give us a little bit more detail, because sometimes there might be a really specific issue in the district or for the campaign. And if you don't live there, if you've never been there, it might be hard to understand just based on a Google search. And so the campaign and candidate can help explain something in more depth, so you're able to provide more critical information on the call and be more confident going into the conversation, feeling you have some knowledge as well. And then in between there, make calls your heart desires, and then we have a Zoom debrief at the end, but we'll get into more detail about that later. So in advance of the phone bank, you create what's called an action ID. If you've done phone banking or canvassing with Minivan, you may already have one, but it's just a centralized login for the phone banking platform. So once you create an action ID once, you'll be good to go for all of our phone banks and events going forward. So if you've never created an action ID before, you click create an action ID, you're prompted to enter an email address that you use, entering a password, first name, last name, and phone number. So how do I phone bank? Am I going to be calling on my phone, calling on the computer? For county to county phone banks, you're going to need two things: your mobile device and your laptop or a tablet or another device where you're going to be looking at the phone bank platform itself. So on your device, you will be logged into that action ID via the phone bank link that we sent y'all. And then on your phone, you're just using it to make those calls. So it's the day of your phone bank. It's 5:30 roughly, and you're kind of getting ready to join that intro Zoom. So like I chatted about earlier, on the Zoom, all the other callers for the night will be on the call with you, as well as the phone bank captain of the night, which is going to be the person who sent you the email earlier, and they're going to be your direct contact with county to county. If you have troubles accessing the link or troubles creating an action ID, shoot them an email and they'll be able to help troubleshoot with you as well. And they'll be on there kind of facilitating the conversation. The candidate or the campaign staff will join the call, answer some questions, and kind of go over what we're doing calls for tonight. And oftentimes the captain will run through the script with folks, because I know sometimes it's always nice to hear from someone else and kind of do a little bit of a dry run, because every script is new and has some intricacies and differences. So it's helpful to see that as well. And if you've phone banked before, you don't have to attend the intro Zoom. Some people, if they're a very experienced phone banker, they make some calls during the day, but it's always a nice way to kind of see the campaign and gain more understanding. So it's highly encouraged if you're able to attend. And so once the intro Zoom's over, 5:55, 6 p.m., you transition into making calls. And so here's where some people have questions. Do I stay on the Zoom? Do I leave the Zoom? The phone bank captain will stay on the Zoom for the rest of the night, ready to kind of tag team and answer questions. And they'll always drop their phone number in the chat, so you can text or call them as questions come up. But you can either totally leave the Zoom, or some people prefer to stay in the Zoom in the background. But what you can do is disconnect from computer audio. So in the Zoom box, the little up caret arrow, and you can click leave computer audio. And then that way you'll be able to make calls and stay on the Zoom without everyone hearing your calls and you hearing everyone else's call. And then you can just do that up arrow again. And then if you've left computer audio, it'll say join computer audio. So if you want to hop back in and ask the phone bank captain a question, you can easily do that as well. But it's also an option to fully leave the Zoom and just rejoin via the link in your email. So now that you've decided if you're going to stay or leave the Zoom, you're ready to hop in to make calls. So the virtual phone bank link that you've received for the phone bank, they'll also drop it in the Zoom chat again. Once you click the phone bank link, no matter which phone bank you're doing, it's going to pop up this blue screen with the person holding the phone, and then over to the side, it's going to say start making calls, and you can click get started. And on the next screen, you'll just be asked to log in with your action ID, which is what you created earlier. So once you click get started and you've logged in, the first thing that pops up is it's going to pop up this page, which has voter name and phone number, as well as some information about the voter. And this information changes depending on the script. It might show early voting location, polling location, as well as the script. You'll see the script is all centrally located in this same box. You've dialed Clarence and you're ready to either leave a voicemail, or if they answer, what do we do next? So oftentimes you'll find with phone banking, the contact rate is rather low. It's 9 to 12% for county to county phone banks. And so if you don't reach the voter, you click I couldn't reach, and then a menu of choices will pop up. Keep in mind, sometimes different choices are available for different phone banks. Most often we are going to be leaving messages. And so that's a frequent option you click. So if you say I couldn't reach and you left the message, then you click left message, save, and next call. And always keep in mind, if you don't reach a voter, what you click and what information is sent back to the campaign is still valuable and critical, especially leaving a voicemail as well. I always like it because I feel like I'm still attempting to contact the voter, and they'll listen to the voicemail and get some critical information from it. And they're usually very short and concise and deliver that key information over to the voter. So no call is a wasted call. Every information is important. And so once you've clicked in the option for what you do, save in next call will become bolded. You click that and it's going to repopulate with a new voter, the same script and different information. And something that people ask me sometimes is like, how will I make sure I'm not calling someone else that someone else has already called that night? But it's a generative list. So as I make a call, as Sarah makes a call, that information is going back into that same central database. So we're not going to end up getting the same person in the same night. So no one's going to be called like 5 times by 5 different people. So going in depth a little bit more, that I couldn't reach options, I know were always a little confusing for me sometimes about making sure that I give the right information. So we've broken it up into 2 different slots. If you do not reach the voter and if you do reach the voter. So if you do not reach the voter, that's something like not home, left a message, or disconnected. Not home, you would do less frequently for leaving messages, but that's something like they may now have no voicemail box, or the voicemail box is not set up now, or you get a busy signal, or sometimes people will pick up the phone and then hang up after you say like hello. So then you're not able to leave a message. So that's something that you do there. And disconnect is when you get a number from the phone service saying this number is no longer in service. However, if you do reach the voter, there are some other options for I couldn't reach. Refused is something we rarely use. This is if you're able to positively ID the voter. So you confirm that the person you're trying to reach is the person you're talking to, and they say they never want to be called again. And then not interested, deceased, moved. There's also callback, wrong number. And you can also tell wrong number. Sometimes I'll listen to the voicemail and it'll say, hi, this is a voicemail box for Sarah, but I'm trying to reach a Bob Smith. Then you can know this is not the right number for them. So you can go ahead and enter wrong number. And this guide will be emailed to everyone the day of the phone bank. So some people like to print it out or have it up in a different tab as they're going throughout the phone bank. And so now if you've made the call, you're speaking to the voter, you're going to flow through the script. The script flows as you go through it. So you're going to see there's drop-down options. This is the script for the phone bank that we have coming up next week, as well as calls for tonight. So you'll see one of the first questions is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how likely are you to vote in municipal elections? Where 1 is very likely, 1 is very unlikely, 5 is very likely. You'd click that drop down and you'd have those options 1 through 5. And then you'll see the script directs you to the next space based on that voter's answer. So if they give you 4 to 5, you'll see you have this response, 1 to 3, you have that response, and it flows organically as you move through. So that's something to keep in mind. Sometimes the script can look very massive, but as you read it, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure, but the voter's choosing the adventure for you. And so at the bottom of the phone bank list, you'll see there's a little notes box. So oftentimes for volunteer recruitments, I'll talk to a voter and they say, I want to volunteer. And the option in the phone bank is yes, but they tell me, I loved a phone bank. I always wanted a phone bank. How do I get plugged into that? That is the perfect thing to put in the notes so that when the campaign reaches back out, they go in knowing this voter really wants to phone bank and they're really excited about that. And you can also record additional email if they give you that, or an additional phone number. And if you have add phone and add email, be sure to put that in the corresponding box rather than the overall notes box. And so again, that candidate info, if we have the add phone and add email, you want to drop it in there. And so once you've filled out something in the drop-down box, you're going to actually want to scroll back up to the top of your page where you see that voter name, and then save and next call. And so after save and next call, you move on to the next voter. Something to keep in mind, you're not able to go back. So sometimes people get a call back from a voter and they get information at, like, sometimes it's, I've left a message for a voter, they get the message, they call me back responding about, hey, I'm able to volunteer, or we did text to invite folks to a county party meeting. Sometimes people would call back and say, hey, I'm able to attend, but I don't have a way to go back and enter that information. So if you answer the call and you get the voter's phone number, their name, as well as that information, you can pass it along to the phone bank captain Or if during that intro Zoom, the campaign offered to just take that information, you can send that over and it can get logged on the back end. So it's not lost information. And so you've just completed your first call after you've done all of that and all the things, and you're able to then just continue on. It's the same thing continuously throughout. And then once you're done phone banking for the night, you just go to the very bottom, you click stop making calls, and you click leave session. And for whatever reason, if you have to leave a session in the middle of phone banking, as long as the link is still active, you can click it, log back in again. It'll pop back up a new voter as long as there's still voters to call. And so at the end of the phone banks last till around 8 p.m. So 7:50, 7:55, there's a Zoom debrief at the end and the captain will be there. And sometimes campaigns will be able to join again. And that's a good space for people to debrief about calls. If it was your first time calling, it's always fun to hear someone else have a really great call. Did they have a really bad call, a really interesting conversation? It's always fun to hear about how everyone else's calls went. A good space to reconnect, debrief, and kind of chat with other volunteers.
The most important thing to know when you're talking to a voter about voter ID is that your job is to be positive and supportive to lower the psychological barriers that might come with a voter ID. So although it's new this year, voters are going to be asked to show a photo ID when they go to vote. The most important thing to know and to communicate is that most people already have an ID that they can use. We're going to go into some more details about voter ID and specific questions that you might be asked. But when you're starting out a conversation about voter ID, being positive and supportive and encouraging people to feel like empowered to do this is the most important thing you can do, sort of the most important attitude you can bring to this. And the fact is that whether or not they have an ID, everybody will be able to vote. So we'll go into that a little bit more, but ID should not prevent anybody from going to try to cast their ballot. Here is the list of IDs that have been approved by the Board of Elections. North Carolina driver's license, probably going to be the most common. US passport or passport card will also be accepted. State issued IDs from the DMV, which is also called a non-operator card, will be an acceptable form of ID. Out-of-state driver's licenses can be used, or non-operator IDs can be used if a voter has registered within 90 days of the election. Military or veterans IDs can be used. Tribal enrollment cards. Board of Elections has approved certain student IDs and certain public employee IDs. We'll go into where you can find that list. And if a person doesn't have any of those types of ID above, they can get a North Carolina voter photo ID card issued by the Board of Elections. And now I'm going to dive into some questions that people might have. Again, this is for your information, and I wouldn't lead with this when you're talking to voters on the phone bank, but it will help you provide more information for questions that they might have. Which student IDs can be accepted? There's a list online, and you can use the QR code or type in this URL. All of the IDs that will be approved for 2023 have already been approved. And unfortunately, relevant for calling into Granville next week, the Vance Granville Community College student ID was not approved. It may be the case that next year there are more IDs approved, but this year anybody who is a student at Granville Vance Community College will have to have a different form of ID in order to vote. Can I use an expired ID? For the most part, the answer is no. An ID must be unexpired or expired for less than a year. One important exception is for a voter who is 65 years or older. They can use an expired form of ID if that form of ID was unexpired on their 65th birthday. So that might be important to know if you're talking to an older voter who maybe no longer drives and hasn't kept their driver's license active. If it was active when they turned 65, then it can be used. And there is a small subset of IDs that can be used regardless of expiration date and issuance date. And that includes military or veterans IDs and tribal enrollment cards. If I don't have an acceptable ID, how can I get one for free? Again, most people already have an ID that they can use, but if somebody doesn't, there are two places to go. The first is the County Board of Elections, and the second is the DMV. And I will recommend unequivocally the Board of Elections as a place to go because it is a lot easier to do. But that ID that will be issued by the Board of Elections can only be used for voting. So if you go to the Board of Elections in your county, you can just walk in. You don't need to make an appointment. You don't need to bring any documentation. You just fill out a form that has your name, your birthday, and the last 4 digits of your social security number. And they'll check that information against your voter registration in the system. They'll take a picture, and then they'll print out an ID card on the spot. The DMV will issue like a proper non-operator ID that could be used for getting on an airplane, for example. But it also has a higher barrier to accomplishing that, achieving that. So you have to have an appointment, or you have to be willing to walk in and wait at the DMV. And you have to bring documentation proving your age, identity, your social security number, and your North Carolina residency. And it takes 20 days to mail. Do I need a photo ID if I vote by mail? For folks who are going to vote by mail, you either need to include a photocopy of your ID, or you can complete and mail in a ID exception form that will be sent to you with your mail-in ballot. It's going to be on a yellow piece of paper, and everybody who requests the mail-in ballot will also get the voter ID exception form. So one or the other if you're voting by mail. And then I alluded to this at the beginning. Everybody should go vote whether or not they have an ID, because you can vote without an ID. If you show up and you don't have your ID, you'll be voting by provisional ballot, and you'll be asked to complete an ID exception form. There are a list of acceptable reasons for the ID exception, and that includes lack of transportation, lost or stolen ID, a disability or illness, family responsibilities, natural disaster within the last 100 days, or a religious objection to being photographed. And if you have an acceptable reason not to have an ID and you've completed an ID exception form, they have said that your provisional ballot should be counted. So anybody can go vote even if they don't have an ID.